Welcome to North Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of our tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts, most recently on NPR this morning, but you can also catch him at The Athletic. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, did you come back with any tote bags?
No, I'm sure they're fresh out.
You didn't come back with any tote bags. How was your NPR?
Could you even say you were at NPR if you didn't come back with a tote bag?
I'm saying, how was your NPR experience this morning?
It was a ton of fun, very even keeled, as would be, I think, appropriate for the venue, and super professional. Man, it feels like they've been running a radio station for at least 5 years or something.
At least.
At least.
It's just a class act all the way. It was a little odd. When I saw the tweet out about questions for you guys on NPR, I was like, wait, really? So I pulled up the app on my phone, turned it on to the news section, and sure enough, there you and Andy were. I'm like, well, this is a little odd.
Yeah, it's weird, right? We didn't confirm it until mid-Monday, and I was like, it's kind of weird tweeting it. So I just didn't tell anybody.
Best to keep this a surprise. Why would we want people to listen?
Right, yeah. And on air, they were just like, we're not getting a bunch of calls. And I'm like, yeah, it's NPR. We're talking about the Vikings. Of course we're not getting calls. I was like, I should probably tweet about my appearance.
I did have a moment where I thought about calling up and asking which offensive lineman you were going to be demanding excellence from this year.
We got one joke question. I was kind of surprised, but I thought we handled it well. We also got someone who was who sounded like Don from Ohio, which is amazing, but it became pretty clear pretty quickly that he wasn't. Where he was just like, so when are we going to see the return on investment after the state invested $500 million into convicted felons playground? And I was like, I assume you're talking about Ziggy Wolf and not a random player.
Are you talking about Haslam? Because I don't know if his trial's finished yet.
Right, yeah, right. And
I did like the line about how Cleveland Browns fans have no hope.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was pretty fun.
The discussion on federal dollars, okay, yep, that's exactly what I would expect to be hearing about on NPR. Right. You're like, oh yeah, that's right. That's that's probably more of the target market aspect of all of this. So yeah, let's talk that. Let's talk about if Egan's going to get their money back on this. So welcome to this week's episode. Probably just going to have the one episode this week as we have a game on Thursday to be talking about later. But we do want to be talking about the win against the Seahawks, the last minute win, the immortal Kyle Sloter throwing a fantastic little touchdown pass. We will be talking about that a lot more. But before we do, just want to thank you guys so much for listening and helping out and supporting the show. If you would like to help out and support the show, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and you can donate there. That's more of a monthly subscription. That will help keep the lights on. You can give anything in the way of $1 a month to $3.50 a month to $5. $5 will get you the Norse Code sticker. However, what we are going to do is we still have some swag from the London game. We still have some stuff from the London game to give out. So what I'm going to do is hold a drawing for the Patreon subscribers. So if you are not a member of the Patreon group, now is your time. And if you do, you'll be entered in the drawing to receive something from the London game. From our London taping. So we'll be sending that out here in the next couple days. But again, if you would like to enter that, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode, and the minimum amount for that is just going to be $1. So $1 will get you access to that. Also, if you go to paypal.me/NorseCode, you can donate there. So, and if you are currently a member of the Patreon, if you are currently helping us out there, you are automatically entered into this drawing. Again, if you've already contributed to the Patreon, you are automatically in this drawing. So that's going to be how that works. that is it for the shilling for right now. Let's talk about the game, because that was an odd little game against the Seahawks, and the first team kind of struggled, and it looked like they were struggling because of the defensive schemes that were being brought in by the Seahawks, specifically the policy of blitz early, blitz often. It didn't look like Cousins reacted well to that to start.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think part of that's on Cousins. I think part of that might also be on the new center, Cornelius Edison. Well, I guess not new center, right? Because they just got one. But on the old new center, Cornelius Edison, who didn't correct the offensive line and identify the blitzes correctly. It's kind of difficult to tell, on the sack that, Bobby Wagner came through on. It's kind of difficult to tell kind of whose fault it is, because you could either say, hey, Isidora was late on the double team. Cornelius Edison was supposed to, move off of the double team and hit Wagner, but he couldn't because Isidora was late to his guy. Or you could say, hey, Compton and Reef are doubling this guy. Compton probably should have just peeled off and gotten the guy. It's difficult to tell who that was, but there's probably some blame that could be just put on the center in general for not anticipating and identifying what needed to be done in that case, because you've got two double teams, right? And then a free linebacker just going right up the middle in between the two double teams, which just never happened. So part of that might be on the new center, but part of it is on Cousins. I was looking at the under pressure numbers in the preseason, which, mind you, like, people have been like under pressure for like 16 dropbacks. I think Matt Ryan was under pressure for 6 dropbacks in the entire preseason. So, these are not like very determinative, right? Like, the sample size is already pretty small when you do under pressure over the course of a whole season. So to take a look at the under pressure numbers now really only tells us a little bit of what we saw and not necessarily what we're going to end up seeing. But we just take a look at stuff under pressure. We see that, like, we've seen quarterbacks take a number of sacks. Simeon, for example, when he's not taking a sack, has completed a pass. So he's taken like 6 sacks over the course of the entire preseason, and he's completed like 8 passes, and he's under pressure 14 times. Thus far, Cousins has not been particularly astounding under pressure, which I don't think it surprises anyone who's watched all 3 preseason games. And we saw a little bit of that in the Seattle game, but it was kind of a mix of the 2 games, right? Because in the Denver game, he had 1 drive, 4 for 4, touchdown, great. And then the next game against Jacksonville, he had 2-3 drives, and they just looked awful. And in this game, awful, and then he's kind of improved over the course of the game. And I think some of that had to do with kind of better reactions to what was happening, being able to change the play, and kind of just getting comfortable with what he's been asked to do.
It was different to watch, and in most instances, it looked like it was just a situation of them sending more guys than we can block. But there were a couple times when off the left side that the dude was just burned quickly.
Yeah, I think so. And sometimes, that's on the tight end, not as much Riley Reef, who ended up with a pretty positive PFF grade, really good PFF grade for the game. But I don't think played sort of as well as his grade, but he definitely played a lot better than he has all preseason or in training camp. But like a lot of times you've got like Blake Bell one-on-one against like a defensive end, right? And you're like, well, okay, I don't know what else you're going to see out of that. Like
at that point, you're just hoping it just delays the inevitable.
Right, yeah. Or, we saw pressure careening off the right side. I think Brian O'Neill was not logged with the pressure from PFF in the game, and I have to say I don't agree with it, but okay. I thought there were like 2 instances in the game where you could say he got beat. Maybe it didn't lead to a pressure, but he got beat. Yeah, that's so we saw unblocked pressure, I think, from safeties. It was just generally speaking, I think, a rough game for the protection unit as a whole. Whether or not that has to do with correctly identifying the blitz and responding to it, whether or not it means hey, the Vikings should throw hot and have a receiver ready for when a blitz happens, or what have you.
Which is basically what they ended up switching to eventually. Once they realized that the only thing they were going to do was blitz, it was okay, well, let's start doing dump offs. Let's start doing 3-yard passes if they're going to send all of their defenders up.
Yeah, no, that was that was pretty smart. I mean, it does make for a boring looking game, right? Because it's just like, oh, dink, dink, dink. I think Sluter has the highest accuracy rating under pressure over the course of the entire preseason among the quarterbacks, but he's got basically an identical yards per attempt to Simeon and Cousins in under pressure, just in general, actually. And that's obviously a result of just dink, dink, dink and letting stuff happen. I would say that's that might be what people will anticipate kind of all year, where they'll probably dial up pressure early in the game to kind of see how the Vikings respond. And if they respond poorly, the Vikings will be kind of forced into a short game. And it's much easier to contain a short game, even if you've got really good, yards after catch threats, like both Thielen and Diggs, but especially Diggs. And of course, like Dalvin Cook. So that's a reasonable response, I think, in the game. I would hope that they would find some ways to generate big plays. I think we have seen moments where like Case Keenum or Teddy Bridgewater, or on the occasions that he was kind of healthy and active for the Vikings, Sam Bradford, where you would end up having a one-step drop that, it was a go route. And because Diggs and Thielen, especially Thielen, are really good off the release of the line of scrimmage, they'd be open. 17 yards downfield, a one-step drop, and you just fire. And that's a really great response to pressure because it's an intermediate pass that ends up going for a big gain that makes defenses not want to play cover one, which allows them to send an extra rusher or to play a bunch of man coverage with just cornerback singled up and responsible for single wide receivers. So the response, I think, over the course of the season is going to have to be varied. Sometimes you're just going to have hot routes against specific types of blitzes that you'll see. But other times you should take advantage of the coverages that you see that they require themselves to go into when they generate these pressure packages. So hopefully we'll see, as the season develops, better versions of that. But yeah, for now, it's reasonable and it makes sense.
So let's talk about Dalvin Cook. He appeared, he started, he had 2 carries, and that was it. People had asked,
like two carries and like 3 snaps. Cool.
They were like, well, some people wanted more. Other people were like, okay, so we wanted him to get hit at game speed. Good. Now get him the hell out of there.
Yeah, I wanted to see more. I mean, I get the get him the hell out of there. He just got injured and it's only the preseason and stuff like that. But I mean, to me, 3 carries does not acclimate you to NFL speed. I mean, we remember Adrian Peterson sitting out of the preseason for multiple years in a row,
or
and then
playing just game 3 for a series and then going out. I think I remember one specific year he had 1 carry and they took him out. He's like, I'm good. I got hit. I'm good.
Yeah, and then every year he'd start off the year kind of whatever, right? He'd get 80 yards in his first week. And maybe, I haven't tested this. Maybe it's all apocryphal. Maybe it's just something we remember from the 2012 season where he ends up rushing for nearly 2,000 yards, but averaged 80 yards a game for the first 3-4 weeks. Finished it by averaging 200 yards a game. So whatever. But it was
a recipe for success.
If you believe that you want those preseason reps to get your guy acclimated so that they can start the season at full strength, it's very difficult to also believe that 2 carries is enough. No, he needs to get in there and experience NFL game speed. But okay, he's done.
And it kind of leads credence to the idea that what they're going to do is lean more heavily. They're going to lean a little bit more on Latavius Murray to start the season at least, probably in the percentage carries.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if at the beginning of the season we end up seeing kind of closer to a 60-40 split And then as the season kind of evolves, we move closer to 30-70. The split, I think, in the first 4 games last year was like 80-20. So they may just kind of move, especially because they're pretty happy with what they've, seen from Murray. They may just kind of move to always have Murray be a little bit more of an option, and just rest Dalvin Cook for longer periods of time, which makes him, less valuable for fantasy. Ted, you shouldn't have drafted him like 6th overall in your league, whatever. But yeah, I think that like the way they treated Cook in the preseason might give us some clues as to how they want to treat the Cook Murray, split in the regular season. Small clues, but clues nonetheless.
I was going to say, in response to Ted's question about would he be too much of a homer to, if he was going to be too much of a homer to do it, my response would have been, no, what you should have done if you were going to be a complete Vikings homer with the 6th pick was just pick up the Vikings defense. Just no one would have seen.
That's great. That's
nobody,
a baller. That's fantastic.
Nobody at that Hooters is going to see that coming. That would throw people off. That could potentially start a run on defenses in the first round. There you go. That's the that's the scary stuff right there. So
I really like, well, especially like my favorite version of this. Sorry, tangent. My favorite version of this is if the league rules are designed such that like defenses are like scary important, but no one realizes it because they're like defenses. Like sacks are worth like 4 points and defensive touchdowns are worth like 8. And like you get points for like a tackle. Like, I could see like someone like alerting everyone to the rules of the league by drafting the Vikings defense like 6th overall. Like I picked the Vikings.
Whoa.
But you mean the Vikings quarterback? No, the Vikings defense.
Wait, Diggs? No. The entire defense. That is what I am doing right now. Woof. So I want to mention the Diggs catch because it was so damn pretty. And it's just one of those things where Diggs had a couple of really nice moments in the preseason game. One was the catch, and one was the was that? That wasn't necessarily a juke. That was a spin move that he tossed out there, wasn't it?
Well, on the crossing route.
Yes.
Yeah. Juke / spin move, I guess.
Yeah. But yeah, Diggs had a couple of really nice moments out there. And just as Paul Allen was complaining that there hadn't been any real passes this preseason to both Thielen and Rudolph, they both proceeded to get a catch. You've been kind of critical over the lack of chemistry with Rudolph specifically. How do you feel this has progressed throughout the preseason?
Yeah, I mean, we saw a catch towards Rudolph. I mentioned in my most recent article at The Athletic that Rudolph has not had a bunch of catches in the preseason, and this kind of mirrors the fact that he just hasn't had many targets in training camp or anything like that. One reason I keep bringing it up is just because I feel like there's this, well, I know that there's this narrative, but I feel like people have bought into this narrative that because you have DiFilippo and because you have Cousins, over the last 3 seasons, the 2 of them, so that's like 6 valuable seasons over the last 3 years, have had tight ends be the top target in their respective offenses 4 times and was second in targets in like a 5th time. Like they friggin' love tight ends, right? Gary Barnidge had a Pro Bowl year with John DiFilippo. You had a great Zach Ertz, Trey Burton split with like Brent Selleck on the team. With the Eagles, you had Jordan Reed, Vernon Davis with Washington, and now people are like, oh, they love targeting these tight ends. And it's like, well, I mean, take a look at the receivers on these teams. Aside from the year that, Deshaun Jackson was there and was good, which, by the way, Deshaun Jackson like led that team in targets that year anyway. You've got like, do you throw it to Jordan Reed or like Jamison Crowder? Well, Crowder's a really good slot receiver, but like Jordan Reed is Jordan Reed. Do you throw it to like Zach Ertz or Torrey Smith? Like, do you throw it to Gary Barnidge or... Remember, Josh Gordon's not healthy, so it's like, I don't even remember who's on that team. Kenny Britt?
I think Kenny Britt and a couple of bodies, a couple of geeks, and that's it.
Yeah, so like, And it's not that Kyle Rudolph is bad. He's better than Gary Barnidge. There's no question about that. But like the difference in talent between like Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen and Kyle Rudolph is in the opposite direction than it was on those other teams. So I keep bringing it up because people are like, this could be Kyle Rudolph's year to get like, and Rudolph had a really good year 2 years ago in terms of his totals, right? I think he got like 800 yards, which is really great for a tight end. But, this could be his year to kind of establish himself as a high volume guy, and he's not doing that. And I think it's weird because Cousins keeps talking about how great it is to throw to Kyle Rudolph, and then he just like doesn't do it. And when he does do it, it's like in weird spots. Like he doesn't know where Kyle Rudolph is or is supposed to be. So he throws it behind him or too low or too high. And that's, Rudolph's had a couple of drops in camp, which is like kind of unusual given that he like led the league in drop rate last year. He had only like 1.7% of his drops or his catchable passes were dropped last year. So I think that this is kind of a concern. It would be resolved over the course of the season. Thielen is less of a concern to me because I feel like it's easier for Thielen to like adjust to poorly thrown passes than for Rudolph, even though that's kind of Rudolph's primary job, whereas that's just kind of a tertiary job for Thielen. And Thielen, I think, is just more adaptable as a receiver. Plus, we saw more targets. I think we got, 5 targets for Thielen in the game? And he got like 4 of them. So that's like pretty significant. And some of them are like screen passes, so they kind of don't count. But it's not like the drag route to Diggs was particularly difficult either. It's something kind of worth mentioning because if you're the kind of person that like really strongly believes in like #chemistry, then this is important to note that then probably Rudolph and Thielen don't have a ton of chemistry with Cousins. If you're someone who kind of doesn't believe in it and just think that quarterbacks will throw to the open guy, and that it's true that like it exists, but not to the extent that we can kind of see it on the field, then yeah, I wouldn't worry about it, right? Because it's just like, it's not like Rudolph suddenly became bad. It's just that Cousins hasn't been using him all that much.
No.
He's used Treadwell more.
Yeah, that is, the Treadwell thing is still an adjustment for Vikings fans, I think. And Treadwell having a couple of really big plays there, really not used to that, I think. And even with the reports coming out of training camp about how good Treadwell's been, like, I don't think anyone was really prepared to see him unleash this last game.
Yeah, and it's been interesting, because people have been talking about Treadwell for, as long as since he's been drafted. And, his first year, even like the training camp reports were pretty like whatever. And then, of course, during the season, he just didn't do anything. And then last year, the training camp reports were not, they certainly weren't pessimistic, but they weren't this optimistic, but the storyline of maybe this is his breakout year was kind of everywhere. And so by the time we got rolled around to this year and people were like, yeah, he's having a great training camp. And I was watching his great training camp, and it was difficult for me to buy in just because I remembered all of the stories last year about how this could be his breakout year last year. And, I guess in a way it was because he like, what did he do? Like
he had
12 times? He multiplied his receiving yardage by 12 times?
Yeah, he had more than one catch the entire year. So that was important.
Yeah, in that sense, it was like a breakout. Right. But it wasn't that interesting. And then also for me, it was a little bit more difficult to swallow because I had just written a piece before the season had started, before the training camp had started, that it's very difficult for like receivers who only have 200 career yards to like suddenly get 500. But he looks like, one of the 3 receivers, in his, draft slot range to be the kind of guy that could end up becoming a 500, 600 yard guy based off of what we saw in training camp, based off of what we saw in the preseason. It seems like, he's running routes kind of where quarterbacks want him to be, which was kind of a big problem for him in the past. He's not overworking himself, which apparently was also a problem in the past. And, he's still, an aggressive player. And finally, he can kind of use that aggression in a way that the team can use as opposed to just kind of use it aimlessly.
I remember getting into an argument on NFL Reddit last season, before the season started, people were giving this big.
That's always smart.
It's a wonderful idea to get into an argument on the internet for any reason, really. But in this particular instance, it was guys that were previewing the teams, and I think in the NFC North, and talking about the receivers that were available. And they had listed the top 3 receivers as Diggs, Thielen, and Treadwell. To which I responded with, "Let's pump the brakes on that third one." And people got like really upset, like, "Oh, it would be a surprise for you guys to be using your first round pick from last year as a wide receiver." It's like, yeah,
yes,
you didn't watch him last year, did you? Like, right. No, it's hard to drop that bias, but he's been looking really, really nice out there. So
yeah, I'm surprised that got an argument. He has 215 career yards.
And at that point, he had only had 1 catch. So, like, I think it was just a situation of, like, Googling and not knowing. Be like, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. It's not a situation where I would, like, declare myself, I am Vikings expert, but you are not, blah, blah, blah. I was like, dude, he had 1 catch last year. Let's pump the brakes on that third receiver thing. We just picked up the kombucha guy. Like...
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
At the time, that seemed like a possible third option. It turned out not to be.
Extreme DUI is right there and waiting.
He just wants to hang out with Kyle Rudolph for another episode of Rudy and Floyd. Yeah. Let's talk about the defense. Defense looked good against. Defense looked pretty good to start out the game anyway against the Seahawks.
Yeah, there's a story. I think it's on 1500 ESPN. I'll link it. Of how Danielle Hunter has just looks different and he's breaking out. And I haven't read the story, so I can't say if it's good or bad. But I mean, I typically like the content that Matthew Collar writes. Don't tell him I said that. And so I expect it to be good. And I imagine it'll have some discussion about, does he look great because he's rushing off the right side as opposed to the left side a lot? Should he stay on the right side or stay? Should he? Yeah. When Everson Griffin comes back, which he has now come back, or kind of what should happen? And that's part of the reason that the defense looked good, right? That Danielle Hunter is killing it. And then Sheldon Richardson, I thought, looked really good. I got into an argument with people about this. Not an argument. People disagree with me. And I just kind of let it go.
If every time someone disagreed with you, it was referred to as an argument, all you would do was just have arguments all day.
I mean, I kind of still. But yeah.
Yeah. My bad.
Yeah. But yeah. Sheldon, I thought Sheldon Richardson had a good game. He had a couple of pressures that were not unblocked that he was just able to get to. He did a pretty good job, I think, in the run game until they got to the traps. And a bunch of people were like, well, he got eviscerated on traps the entire game. It's like, well, I mean, they kind of trapped him maybe 3 times. And one time got pointed out, I think, by the broadcast and on Twitter. And so I think when people don't GIF every good play and they GIF one bad play for a player at a position that you don't get a lot of exposure to. So if it's a guard or a nose tackle, or in this case, a 3 technique, that GIF becomes how people perceive their game. And he got trapped on a near goal line play, which I don't even think was all that much his fault in terms of the big run that it ended up allowing, because I thought the linebackers reacted pretty poorly to that trap as well. And I thought he dealt with the traps fine. He didn't destroy them or anything like that. But yeah, okay, yeah, he got trapped a couple of times. He had a good game. He was able to occupy run lanes. He was able to put pressure on the quarterback. And I think he got pressure 3 times in that game, which based on his number of snaps is actually pretty good for a defensive tackle. So yeah, that I think helps. I think the front 4 just did a pretty decent job. Brian Robinson, had a better game for him than he has recently. Linebackers largely look good. The defensive backs look great. They always look great. Well, not always, but that's not a huge surprise. Defense looked pretty good. They probably need to do a little bit more to shore up what was happening in the run game. And I think that's a little bit more on the linebackers than it was on the defensive line. But yeah, overall it looked pretty good.
Yeah, it wasn't until later that the gaping holes for the run game seemed to have propped open. and it didn't seem like we were able to stop them much. And also, if we're going to be talking about things that need to be worked on, we again need to be pointing to the punt return defense, because Jesus, that was ugly again. And if not for the penalty, that would have been another touchdown.
It's interesting because this is like Holton Hill's first good game as a punt coverage guy. And we actually saw Caleb Jones screw up a little bit in punt coverage. We saw Trey Matthews screw up a lot in punt coverage. We saw Mike Needham screw up. I think we may have seen Corey Robertson screw up too. It was not good. I mean, it continues to be not good. One thing that we should probably keep in mind, so we're seeing like all of these like punt returns go for big yardage. I think in every preseason game now, we've seen like whether or not it's called back. And I don't think a single time it's happened to the quote unquote first team punt coverage unit. So we should probably keep that in mind. But, it's still concerning. I think we also saw scripts on kickoffs. I know Garrett Dooley screwed up. I think I tweeted out a GIF of that. I think Jaron Kearse may have screwed up on a kickoff as well. Just generally speaking, the coverage units have been not good, but they haven't been like the quote-unquote first team special teams unit. So it may not be as bad as it looks, but it's definitely a concern. And it's really impacting people's ability to make the roster. So, for example, Holton Hill, especially if he hadn't had a good game on Saturday. If he hadn't had a good game on Saturday in punt coverage, he might have just been cut. And like that's surprising, right? Because they gave him like a huge signing bonus for an undrafted free agent, relatively speaking. They were competing for him with multiple teams. He's kind of one of the guys that, and I say every year, like, don't overestimate the number of players that'll be snatched from waivers. It's always way less than you think. He's one of the guys that you could see getting snatched on waivers if he was cut. But if he can't do anything on special teams, he's not helping you right now as your like sixth defensive back. Because like if you're at your sixth defensive back, like, yeah, I guess it's nice if he's good, but you're probably screwed anyway. So, it's tough because like a lot of these guys will end up making or not making the team based off of what they're doing on special teams. So, if Garrett Dooley is screwing up, I mean, your backup linebacker's first job is not backup linebacker. It's like primary special teamer, right? That's how like Larry Dean and Rock McKenzie or whatever his name was. I think he's a coach now. But that's how all these like 220-pound linebackers, Brandon Watts, how they ended up making the team is that they did like reasonably enough in special teams. And a lot of these guys have screwed up on special teams quite a bit. And a lot of it has to do with kickoff coverage and punt coverage.
Yeah, it's just odd to see, and thankfully it isn't the first team, but it is worth just mentioning briefly. So the big storyline coming out of the game afterwards, after Sloter's wonderful little touchdown pass, is the argument of who is the number 2 quarterback. And currently it is still...
Seems to have been a settled argument for the Vikings.
Yes, so they have decided to keep Simeon up there. What are the coaches seeing that the fans don't?
It's always something that like you can't immediately or easily identify based off of what you're seeing. And you have to basically just generate a list of questions and see kind of which answers are the most likely, right? And so is Simeon doing a better job in team meetings on the whiteboard? Is he doing a better job of kind of recognizing what they need to do when they talk about it? Is he doing a better job of helping prepare QB1? That's like part of it too. Although kind of where you are on the depth chart doesn't matter as much for that very last thing. Because Kellen Moore was always QB3 and he was like really good at helping prep whoever the starting quarterback. Well, Matt Stafford usually. But yeah, those kind of play a role. I mentioned once, and I think I tweeted this out, that I think there was a play where Sluter got like just demolished on an unblocked sack. And, a lot of people are just like, nah, the offensive line should have seen that. But a lot of times the protection calls are on the quarterbacks. And I think in this particular case, you had a person to every person, right? They blitzed like 8 and you had 7 in protection, or they blitzed 7 and you had 6 in protection. And so a guy just, goes free. And in those cases, it's on the quarterback. And usually the quarterback designates a hot route and throws quick. But in this specific case, I noticed that no eligible receiver had turned quickly in response to the blitz, which tells me maybe that Sluter doesn't have as complex an offense that he's working with that Simeon may be working with. Right. And so if he can't make adjustments, or if he doesn't know how to adjust protections, or if he just isn't given like the reins to adjust things based off of what he sees, then he may be playing better in this particular situation, especially in those 2-minute drills that we've seen. But he may not be as useful as a backup, like overall. Because you throw him in there, and I mean, what do teams do when you've got backup quarterbacks in? They do like crazy stuff that a normal quarterback should be able to take advantage of, but a backup quarterback might be flustered, especially if they're young, like Sluter. So those all may kind of play roles. Again, you can really just only generate a list of questions and try to answer which ones seem most likely to you. But I think those are probably part of the reasons that you would say, hey, Simeon may not have looked all that great in the preseason, but I mean, he's probably a better quarterback too, given kind of the circumstances we would see in a game. Remember, Case Keenum, not to compare everything to this insanely unlikely story, remember, Case Keenum looked like awful in the preseason, and kind of Taylor Heineke looked a little bit better, not a ton better, and you could just as easily argue the other way. But I thought there was a better argument that Heineke should have been quarterback too. And Case Keenum had a 13-3 season as the quarterback that I don't think, had Heineke been there and on the team, would have been able to do. It's based off of a lot of the stuff that you can't see. So those are my guesses. But based off of the stuff that I can like verify and know, based off of what I've seen, I'd take Sluter as QB2. But there's a lot of stuff that comes into play here.
That game-winning drive he had was pretty impressive, especially because right before that touchdown pass, he got smoked on a sack.
He just destroyed. Yeah.
Yeah, just ugly, but ended up sneaking it in. And as a result, we can talk about the rise of Chad Beebe. How is
the rise of Beebe?
The rise of Beebe. I like this. So let's talk a little bit about Chad Beebe and how he has kind of progressed this preseason.
What would we name that movie? Is it like The Welker 2, The Rise of Beebe?
I think you name that if he ends up getting cut and ends up signing in New England, because New England. Ends up being
for Miami, it was like in division, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be New England. It could be like the Lions, or I guess the New England equivalent in the division would be the Packers. Oh, gross. Okay.
Yeah, let's not do that. Let's not make him the new Jordy Nelson, shall we?
Right. Yeah. Really more Jeff Janis, but good. Yeah, I guess it's weird, right? Because Beebe was injured for a lot of the offseason, comes into camp, and as a rookie, in the rookie session of camp, he looked like pretty bad, actually. Like not even like not good, but like pretty bad. He was like rounding off routes. He wasn't generating any separation. He had quickness, but not deception. He didn't have speed, so he couldn't, get open downfield. He had a terrible release off the line, so he could only be used from the slot, which that's still kind of true anyway, but, and, he was the subject of passes that were deflected a lot. And what's interesting is that that's probably not the quarterback's fault, because all the quarterbacks actually played in the rookie session or practiced in the rookie session. They're the only ones that weren't barred from practicing with the rookies that were veterans, aside from the practice squad guys. So yeah, it wasn't because Peter Pujols makes consistently poor decisions and doesn't have enough arm. It's because, he just wasn't doing enough to attack the ball and get separation. As camp progressed, he'd gotten better and better. And it's not even like he spiked anywhere. it was kind of like a steady but rapid increase in like the quality of play. So like a week later, he looked fine. He looked better than Jeff Badditt, who he hadn't, in rookie camp. He already looked better than Corey Robertson. He looked better than Jake Weineke. He had begun to separate himself from that group. And then this last week of camp, we're off the Brandon Zylstra train. He's injured. Who cares about him? I forgot his name already. Who is he? Who am I talking about? It's all about Chad Beebe. He could make the roster now. And it's come with a corollary increase in play. It's not just like he was playing all really well and we just hadn't been talking about him, or that he played poorly in practices and then turned it on in the games. He looked good against like the Jacksonville Jaguars in joint practices, right? So this is like a super interesting thing to talk about. He has like really awful measurables, and I think that includes some of the agility measurables, but like certainly it's very rare for a small wide receiver to not have good straight line speed and succeed in the NFL. And you could probably name the examples because those exceptions are pretty rare. I think Welker is an example. I think in kind of Tyler Lockett, but not really. I mean, there's not a ton. And I think even Cole Beasley ran in the 4.5s. But yeah, it's not super common to see that kind of skill set translate. But we've been seeing it, and it's certainly an exciting story.
Yeah, it's nice to see somebody just kind of rise up out of obscurity like that. And I say obscurity. His dad was an NFL player, but still, like that's still pretty impressive of his appearance. Any final thoughts about the game?
Honestly, I'd like kind of forgotten a lot of the game. I've just been focusing on writing these previews. I will say, I mean, we brought up the Diggs catch. We didn't talk about it all that much. It was like phenomenal. Right?
Yeah, that was a pass that could not be defended against. Like the only way you defend against that is by getting the penalty.
Right, and like Diggs played it perfectly because he didn't flash his hands until the very last second. He made a great adjustment on the ball. It was pretty good. So that's one thought. Oh, we didn't even talk about Daniel Carlson. How could we forget Daniel Carlson?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah, missed 42-yard field goals. And Mike Prefer said, what was it, today? I think he said, good kickers don't miss 2 kicks in a row. Which, I don't know if that's necessary, but okay, sure.
Yeah, and just for like, I want to say accuracy's sake, but I don't even know if that's necessarily the word for it. Eric Thompson had actually just mentioned something a little bit ago, saying that Daniel Carlson went 5 for 5 in field goals today, including a pair of 42-yarders.
Yeah, so, right. Yeah,
at least in non-game situations, he is nailing them apparently. But that was rough. Yeah, that's. Boy, this is why we can't have nice things, isn't it?
Right. I mean, we called it on the last Norse Code. We were like, hey, probably don't cut Kai Forbath because what happens if he just begins...
We totally called it.
Right. We called it or caused it. One of the two.
We were advocating for the competition to continue. If I remember correctly, we were not saying cut him at all. We were saying keep him around because, what if he has the yips next game and then...
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, if he misses like every kick in the next game, and then you're just like, okay, well, I guess Forbath still isn't signed, right? Do you know if he's been signed? I haven't seen anything.
No, I haven't seen anything either.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Maybe he's not guaranteed a job. Who knows? But yeah, I guess you could always call him back up. Because, I mean, the game's on Thursday. There's not a lot of time left for Forbath to be signed. But it'd be weird if after 2 preseason games they're like, yeah, you know what?
That would be the saltiest kicker. That's the name of your movie. The saltiest kicker.
Saltiest kicker. So the last unicorn and the saltiest kicker.
Exactly. If I were Kai Forbath in that situation, I would walk in with such a chip on my shoulder.
That's great, man. Maybe he could kick a 50-yarder. Sorry. Okay, so James, what do you do? What do you do in this situation, right? Okay, so your 5th-round kicker that has like this amazing leg, right? He misses 2 field goals in the 3rd preseason game. All right, so you trot him out in the 4th preseason game, and he gets 5 field goal opportunities. One from 30 yards, 35, 40, 45, 50, right? Like it just works out like that. And he misses all of them. He's a rookie. He's missed 7 kicks in a row now. You invested like a pick in him. You cut your other dude. Do you cut him?
Boy, that's as well.
2 preseason games.
It really
but he's
depends.
missed 7 in a row.
Yeah, I was gonna say it really depends on who ends up being available at that point. I mean, if it's something that they deem that would be correctable, I say keep him on for that extra 4th week. And I'm not saying you tank your offense. I am saying, like, if you hit the 30, stop. Because that guy needs reps out there in real game situations.
Yeah, right. Here's an idea. I hadn't even thought about this until just now. So the Ravens have a kicker/punter in camp that they're not going to keep, right? Because they've got Justin Tucker, the best kicker in the NFL. He's a pretty all right punter and a pretty good kicker. He's like from Norway or whatever, so there's probably not a language barrier because like a bunch of Scandinavians speak English.
Well,
but,
yeah, it's Career Vedvik is his name.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you could cut Ryan Quigley and grab this Norwegian dude, just out of left field, right? Mm-hmm. Grab this Norwegian dude. He's your punter, and now you've always got someone kind of breathing down Carlson's neck. So if he misses all his kicks, in the first game, you're like, maybe it's correctable, maybe it's not. It's only been, 2 preseason games and regular season game, but like 8 kicks in a row, that's not great. And then, in your second game, you're like, screw it, punter/kicker. Bye, Carlson. We know how to cut our losses. You don't have any guaranteed money. You're a 5th-round pick.
And how beloved would a Norwegian kicker be for the Minnesota Vikings?
Yeah. And he's unique, right? He plays both the kicker and punter position. You'd have to like get Sluter to be a holder, but that's really just opportunity for trick plays, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you need to like resolve your holder situation, like big deal.
Well, you know what amazes me is that we actually got a question on this from an obvious Norwegian from the spelling of his name on Twitter. Pal, and that's not an umlaut over his A, so I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce that, but we did get a tweet about this asking if it was time to cut Daniel Carlson because Adam Schefter had tweeted about how Care Vedvik is still available out there. And is impressing
that's
people.
Funny.
So we're getting
definitely not time to cut Carlson yet. It's like 2 kicks, right?
Yeah, the Norwegians are contacting Norse Code about picking up a Viking. I like this.
Yeah, this is perfect. But I'm just saying, hey, he misses like the next 4 kicks, preseason or regular season, doesn't matter, right? You got to think about it then, right?
Yeah, I think at that point, once the people on the Norse Code fantasy football leagues start paying attention to you,
right.
Things aren't going your way, bud. Things are not going your way. So I guess the next question that we have, moving past the game, is the question: are we preparing for a few games without Pat Elflein, as we traded for Brett Jones this week?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they don't make this trade without anticipating a couple of missed games. But also, sneakily, this could help resolve the guard situation, too. There'd been like a soft rumor, I think, in part inspired by, Paul Allen saying it on the air that, watch for like a sneaky trade by the Vikings. And then I think Doogie confirmed that they've reached out to a couple of teams about offensive linemen. And people just kind of assumed guard, right? They're not happy with Isadora and Compton there. And now you've got some excellent depth instead of, a bad starter and bad depth, right? So that made sense. But then you think about it in the context of like, well, maybe Pat Elflein is not actually day to day, and he was going to miss the first couple of weeks of the game of the season. And Zimmer said they weren't going to put him on the regular season PUP, which means that he would not be. If you put him on the regular season PUP, and I have to refresh myself on the rules, but I do remember it from like when it happened to Teddy. he would not be allowed to be activated for 6 weeks. And then once he's activated, he has to take at least 1 to 3 practice weeks before he sees the field. He has 1 to 3 practice weeks, minimum 1 week, maximum 3 weeks. And then he sees the field, or he's active on game day and he's part of your roster. So if they're not going to put him on the PUP, that means they expect to have him back before week 6. So that's like good. But yeah, Brett Jones is competing with Cornelius Edison. They made that clear that he's competing with Edison for that center spot. And once Elflein is healthy, they may cut Edison. They may cut this guy that they just traded for. This seems kind of unlikely to me, or whatever. Right. But, we had another question come in that was like, hey, so once Elflein comes back, assuming Brett Jones is viable, right? Regardless of who wins, right, between Edison and Brett Jones, once Elflein is back, is it possible that Brett Jones plays left guard, instead of Compton or Isadora? And Jones has played guard in his career, especially in the CFL. And I would say yes. He does have he does way more than a lot of centers do, right? Because he's 312 pounds, something like that. And that's kind of like the lower threshold for what you want your guard to be. Because like centers are 300 pounds, guards are like 320, tackles are like 310, kind of like roughly. Like the Bills a couple of years ago, everybody was like over 330. But yeah, I think you could have him play guard. And I think that that's a possibility to keep in mind. The only issue, of course, is that they don't have very much time to like prep him for center in the first place, much less, figure out what the line looks like with him at guard. But it's something to keep in mind for sure, especially after Isadora had a pretty rough game.
And there had been talk that one of the reasons why they picked him up was because, since he's out in New York, with the connection between New York and Minnesota, the idea of the system would be somewhat similar, maybe, but that's still a heck of a placement thing from going like, you're playing this particular system to now you're in Minnesota and we need you to be ready because you're competing for the number 1 spot right now. Right.
Yeah. And, apparently Shermer gave Zimmer a scouting report on this guy. It's clear that the connection was a part of the trade. So yeah, the thing you said.
The thing I said. So there's a game on Thursday. It's the 4th preseason game. It is the scrappiest of the scrappy games. This is the game where everybody trying to make the team tries to do it in spectacular fashion, or they burn out miserably. And we're doing so against the Titans in Tennessee, in Nashville. I'd say what should we expect from the Titans, but realistically, the Titans as a team don't really matter in the game as much as our second, third, and fourth stringers here. So what would you expect from the Vikings players coming out on Thursday night?
That's a good way to frame it. I'd be interested in seeing kind of what the backup defensive linemen do, because, it depends on whether or not they want to keep 5 or 4 defensive ends. And so that creates a competition between Tayshaun Bauer and Stephen Weatherly. And I would say Bauer's ahead in that competition, but you can probably see things against the Titans, who have probably a better backup offensive line. Not that this is like a very high bar, but probably a better backup offensive line than most teams in the league. So you see a little bit more of a decent test for them. So that'll be interesting. Obviously, kind of what happens with the guard situation, because I think Compton is going to be playing in this game, which means that Isadora is probably playing in this game too. And so they'll still be competing against each other for that guard spot. And then, of course, you want to watch and see what Brett Jones does so soon, and Georgia Loca as well, speaking of recent acquisitions. So that's kind of what's happening on the offensive line. And I mentioned Georgia Loca at safety. Other than that, I want to see, if Zylstra is going to get targets, what he's going to look like. I think Brandon Zylstra needs to reassert himself into this competition, because you can't just drop off after you've had an injury. Like, that sucks. And he looked great. He looked like by far the best of the backup receivers. After Treadwell. And at least the most exciting.
So you want to see kind of if he has the ability to kind of get back into the swing of things. I guess you want to see the punt coverage units and the kickoff coverage units kind of excel. You want to see if Holton Hill can kind of continue his run or his one game run essentially of good special teams play, because then it'll make it a lot easier to keep him / a lot more difficult to cut him. Maybe the better way to put it. You want to see if Marcus Sherrills is injured. You want to see if Chad Beebe can continue to return punts at it looks like a high level, right? And you want to see maybe Mike Hughes returns a punt, and maybe he can play kind of both a punt return and kick return role, and that could be it for Sherrills. And then Courtney Cronin just mentioned it on Twitter. She tweeted it out like an hour ago. But that's something to think about. And those are kind of and then obviously Rock Thomas versus Mike Boone, which we didn't even talk about.
Rock Thomas didn't even play in the game on last Saturday, as far as like between the two. So it'd be interesting to see if they'd end up doing something in the way of like a competition for the Titans game. Really, the only real reason why you should be paying attention to the game.
Yeah, honestly. I do want to find out what happens at like the 7th cornerback spot, a super tight competition somehow. I want to see if they're going to keep 4 or 5 defensive ends. I want to see if Jalen Holmes, who I think did a better job kind of staying tight in his rush lanes and playing the run well. I want to see if he can kind of continue that. There's like interesting questions that like, since I'm writing about all 90 players on the roster, like I'm like super dialed in on, like for example, like I thought Johnny Stanton was playing really well at fullback. Also, who cares? Like, it's like one of those things. Like when I'm like focusing on like every player, I'm like, oh, I've got a take on like Storm Norton, right? And it's like, who? But like, it's a thing, right? They brought in a backup fullback. He's probably not going to beat out CJ Ham. I thought Johnny Stanton was playing so well that maybe he could potentially beat out CJ Ham. And Ham had a pretty good season last year, right? But yeah, and it's super easy for me to say it now that like Stanton's on IR and be like, oh, well, you know what I thought, right? I don't have to ever be proven wrong, but because he's on IR. But yeah. I'm super dialed in on a lot of these questions, right? But it's not that interesting. No, right? None of the starters are playing.
Yeah, for the casual fan, the 4th preseason game is kind of rough. We did end up getting a question in that,
maybe Mac Alexander, Mike. I wouldn't be surprised if Mac played. I guess he's injured. Mike Hughes might also be injured. But if they're not, right, it'd be kind of cool to see how the two of them do.
Yeah, I think Kyle Slaby asked if we could compare the 4th preseason game to food.
Yeah, someone responded with a Skull Troll responded with like the best answer. I can't beat it, which was celery, because it doesn't have any calories and it like precedes like wings.
Yeah,
which is like a metaphor for the regular season. Yeah, so like, okay, yeah, good point.
We'll give you credit on that one. Definitely that. No, I think celery. Yeah, I think celery works for that sort of situation. It really does feel a bit like the Walmart brand of Coke at that point, or like Shasta, as opposed to like real soda. Like, oh, thank you. I guess I kind of wanted something else. Probably.
Honestly, if I was gonna go in a soda direction, and I thought about it, I was gonna say diet, because I can taste the difference between the sugar and the non-sugar. And I hate it.
It's the Coke. It's the Coke Zero to the Coke.
Right. Yeah.
Coke Zero Diet to the Coke.
Coke Zero Diet. And it like tastes flatter to me, and it tastes like it's got a longer aftertaste, and it's just, I hate it. I despise it. But if I need carbonation for whatever reason, and the only option is Coke Zero,
have carbonation.
Right. Yeah. It's like I'm eating something super rich, and it's not like if it's like, oh wow, I'm eating like this McDonald's chicken sandwich that someone has doused in like homestyle gravy for some reason. Like, I'm gonna need like something sharp, and I'm not gonna have wine with this meal. That would be insane. I'll have a Coke Zero.
What wine does pair well with a McDonald's chicken sandwich covered in homemade gravy? should ask our fans this. Which wine do we have any sommeliers?
Please respond, actually, on Twitter, via email, in the comments section.
We want to know. Perhaps we'll even taste test it on the show. We just want to know
not.
what. I was gonna say there's a.
If you're gonna grab McDonald's and some homestyle gravy and just like douse like McDonald's original chicken sandwich with gravy,
I would be willing to do that for an. I am willing to put my body on the line to imbibe that sandwich.
Well, let no one say you don't sacrifice yourself for the show.
You must suffer for your art sometimes. It's a true story. Otherwise, yeah, there's really not much in the way that a casual fan is really going to appreciate the game. It's really the fourth quarter of that is just football death. I think even the scouts start leaving. Yeah, so, it really does resemble guess what, Vikings? You didn't get to play in the Hall of Fame game, but you do get to play your fourth game in Tennessee. So go you. So it's really just an opportunity for people to pick up cheap pick up cheap tickets to actually go to a game. But especially with the conversation that was come out again today about potentially potentially stretching out the season to 18 games. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Jerry Jones, for bringing this back up. It's like, really? That's
we both just
that's nasty. It's just,
that's nasty.
That's just
especially because I think Pro Football Talk brought up, and it may have been Jerry Jones part of his proposal, but Pro Football Talk brought up like, well, what if it's 18 game season, but players were only allowed to play 16 games, and it's like that sucks too. Like either everyone's going to agree to not play their starters for the first two preseason games, so now you've got. Or first two regular season games. So now you've got two preseason games that don't count, two preseason games that do count, and then 16 other games that also count, right? Because no one's going to be like, yeah, we're not going to play our starters in like the 18th like game of the season. Like no one's going to do that.
That first season would be amazing. That first season would just be full of just the weirdest injuries to end up on a report. Like I just imagine the report coming out of New England where they just list everything just to mess with people. Like Brady's had a bum knee on there since his injury.
Right.
Slipped on a cord, stubbed toe. He's out. He's no good for this week. He's day to day.
He's day to day. I mean,
lupus is flaring up. Can't play.
I guess they would still play them in the conference games, but like your first two non-conference games of the season, it would kill divisional games, or intra-divisional games, wouldn't it?
It would completely, and you'd need to increase the number of players on your roster in order to make up for the number of players who'd be down. I mean, San Diego in particular would just be running out of ACLs.
Right. I mean, like, can you okay? So we're traveling to Jacksonville, whatever. I don't think they play Jacksonville. So Miami. We're traveling to Miami, whatever. Let's pretend it's like the first non-division or non-conference game of the year. You're not playing any of your. Like, if you're only allowed to play any particular player for 16 games in an 18-game season. Like, I wouldn't even fly my starting quarterback in case the plane crashed. Like, I would just be like, no.
my starting line is going to be out there with Odell Beckham on his boat.
Right, exactly. It would kill intra-conference games. If you do an 18-game season, you have to have players play all 18 games. Maybe have 2 bye weeks. Almost certainly have 2 bye weeks. And I don't know, move training camp back, because I like the Super Bowl in February because like the draft schedule is
February.
already super compressed.
Early February.
Yeah, early February. Yeah. So early in February, it's still January. But the draft schedule is so compressed. Like the combine happens like 2 weeks later, right? The Senior Bowl had already happened, right? So like really just move training camp back up to the hotter months of summer. That's the best solution. You add 2 more weeks to the season. Maybe you don't have to change the schedule because you take out the 2 preseason games. But I hate the idea of only playing 16 players because now there's no point in having like another conference game,
16
right?
weeks. Yeah, it wouldn't make it. It just wouldn't end up making any sense. And
so then you have to have 2 bye weeks to help kind of protect the players. Although 1 bye week does not make up for 2 extra, but still, that's better.
Oh, it becomes an NBA situation where people complain that the Spurs aren't playing their starters this week. Like, yeah, they needed to rest because the season's so long. Like, it ends up turning into that sort of situation. And for a league that has, let's say, 18 games as opposed to the regular season for the NBA, which is closer to 82, it doesn't make any sense for the Vikings. It doesn't make any sense for the NFL to do it.
Yeah, I mean, because your Super Bowl teams will have played 21 or 20 games at that point, or 21 or 22 games at that point.
Unless you really just want to shut up, like the Dolphins from their the Dolphins that are still around.
Well, that's almost worth it.
Well, maybe. So that is. It's just miserable. Why would I say? Why would anybody want to do that? And I remember the person who brought it up in the first place as an owner. So like, oh yeah, that's right. That's. I suppose that makes a little bit of sense. So that's going to be it for talking about the Titans game. Not a lot of Titans talk, but again, this is mainly players that are trying to make the squad, not players that you will likely be seeing on a regular basis when the actual regular season starts. So let's switch over to the mailbag, and Ian has a great question to start off. It says, if you had to guess, what 3 bubble players are essentially playing a make-or-break game Thursday night?
I'll expand this to 6 so that I can have a pair, right? So like Brandon Zylstra / Chad Beebe, right? Because, if it's a bubble player, if they make the team, someone's not on the team. And I think it's more interesting that way. So Brandon Zylstra, Chad Beebe, I think are the players at the receiver position that are most likely to be in that scenario. I would just cut Kendall Wright. And I consider cutting Tavares. I don't think Kendall Wright's even on the bubble. I would just cut him. But that's who I'm picking there. Holton Hill and that one's a tough one to pair because I don't know that he's necessarily competing with a cornerback. Maybe Jaron Kearse, right? Because then it's a defensive back. So Holton Hill, Jaron Kearse, right? Because you may want to keep 5 safeties. My guess is you still keep 4 and Kearse is gone. But if Hill doesn't perform, maybe you keep Kearse because you like him a little bit more in special teams, although I think he's a little bit overrated in terms of special teams. But yeah, so that's another pair. And then the third pair is, Rock Thomas, Mike Boone. That's easy. I don't even have to.
You don't even need to expound on that. Zen Cupid asks, I've heard that Ioka is both better in deep coverage than in the box, and also better in the box versus deep coverage. Which assessment do you feel is more accurate?
It kind of depends on what you're asking him to do, right? Like if he's in the box and he's playing man coverage, I would say he's better at that than he is being a deep center fielder, right? But if he's in the box and you're asking him to play, zone coverage to a crossing receiver, I would be a little bit more worried than if he's a deep center fielder where he can more readily use his instincts to gain another step or two, right? He's a pretty good run defender. He weighs 225 pounds. He's almost a linebacker, right? And they even mentioned, I think, the hybrid linebacker role for him. So it makes sense from that perspective to put him in the box. But as a deep center fielder, of course, he's got kind of more time to figure out his run fits. One thing to keep in mind is he's not very fast. So if he's a deep center fielder in a cover 3 situation where you want to kind of replicate what Seattle, Atlanta, Jacksonville does on defense, that's not great because the center fielder in those situations has a much greater responsibility. If it's a different kind of cover 3 where the cornerbacks don't quite press as much to the sidelines, then maybe he can succeed, right? He's not very fast in a straight line, but he's got pretty decent quickness. He's got great recognition ability. He can hit with a lot of power. He sometimes has whatever tackling angles, but most of the time they're pretty good. And he's got some tools to compete in man coverage against tight ends and stuff. So that's kind of what you're getting, right? In some situations, he could be better deep downfield where he can kind of take advantage of the fact that the play takes longer to get to him, to use his instincts to gain another step or two. Or he can kind of use his length in some situations to win in man coverage, especially against tight ends that are not known to stretch the field. Like, I wouldn't feel that great pairing him up against Jordan Reed if Jordan Reed can just run a 9 route and you're like, well, okay, sorry, Georgia Loca. Jordan Reed just runs faster than you, even though he's like 20 more pounds. But, you know, if he's up against a tight end, like a lot of tight ends that are going to be running a lot of intermediate routes, if he's up against Kyle Rudolph, yeah, I'd like that matchup. But, it really depends on the matchup and what you're asking him to do.
Zachary asks, he's been very unimpressed with Mike Hughes as a returner, but he's still a great corner, obviously. But he thinks Chad Beebe could make a good punt / kick returner. What do you think?
I don't think he'd make a very good kick returner. I think kick returners rely a lot more on their speed and their acceleration or on their max speed and their ability to get to their max speed. Whereas punt returners rely, I think, a lot more on fluidity and their stop and go ability. And then I think that there's like a little bit more in terms of decision making you have to do as a punt returner than as a kick returner. But yeah, in kick return, you're more likely to kind of try and reverse the field. You're much more likely to try and use your speed to gain that advantage between 23 yards and 27 yards on the same kind of blocking. So I don't actually think Beebe will be all that good of a kick returner. And yeah, I mean, Hughes hasn't really been like a game changer at kick return, but you know, he's probably fine. Like at least fine.
At least fine.
Yeah. Whereas I don't know that Beebe would quite do that. I think on a return that's like blocked well enough to get you 27 yards from Mike Hughes, you'll probably only get 23 or 24 yards from Chad Beebe.
Yeah. It's
probably a good way to put it.
Ben Glazman asks, Pro Football Focus and other data models project the under as the over-under bet to make primarily for like injury luck and stuff. What's your take? What overlooked detail might push you one way or the other?
Don't trust nerds.
Don't trust nerds. You heard it here first on Norse Code from Useful Human and Data Expert.
Yeah, right. Yeah, obviously, I really respect the work that not just Pro Football Focus does, which I think requires maybe a lot of context, but specifically the work that Eric Eager does in terms of using the data behind the Pro Football Focus stuff to generate models to predict wins. He's done a really good job beating Vegas with the models that he's created that allows you to pull players out or put players into models and run simulations. And it's one of the only, or maybe the only model that does a really good job of accounting for the impact individual players have as well as the individual positions have. So like, you can generalize, like, this is how much of an impact a defensive tackle has. A really good defensive tackle will, add, 2 more wins above replacement over, below average defensive tackle. But Aaron Donald is more than a pretty good defensive tackle. He adds like 6, right? Or whatever. 6 is a lot, but, and so, one of the things that's really exciting about this is that you can get nonlinear. It's so exciting. I'm such a nerd. You can get nonlinear models that, take into account the fact that quarterbacks drop off super quickly. So like, your top 3 quarterbacks, they've got like phenomenal wins above replacement. Your next 3 are really good. They've got really great wins above replacement. Your next 10 or so, which is kind of the group I'd put Kirk Cousins in, are also, good. And they still have like 6 wins above replacement, or again, I don't know what the specific numbers are. 6 wins above replacement, because replacement level for a quarterback is like awful. Like, I mean, we've seen a bunch of backup quarterbacks, right? They suck. And so the drop off is pretty big. And you can kind of take that into account. If you've got someone between like the top 16 and a replacement level quarterback and they get injured, you can adjust your model accordingly and say, hey, they haven't lost that many wins. Whereas if you've got a top-level quarterback and he gets replaced by Brett Hundley for whatever reason, then, yeah, you can model that a little bit better. Anyway, so his model is behind the math that calculated that the Vikings would probably be hitting the under in this situation, and defensive injury regression is the Vikings were the least injured team in the league last year defensively, 13th overall, but defensively least injured team. I guess my response to that would be that offensively they were more injured than average, and that's likely to regress back to the mean, and that the Vikings don't have replacement level players behind most of the players at these positions, right? Like maybe at defensive tackle, but at cornerback they have. If you took the Vikings like backup 3 cornerbacks, let's assume that they're Terrence Newman, Mike Hughes, and Holden Hill, I guess, right? I think that's a top half cornerback trio, like in the league. Like that's not a replacement level player. Now they've got Georgia Loka at safety. You've got some questions at linebacker, but Eric's own model predicts that linebackers kind of just don't matter all that much. So, plus Eric Wilson is playing friggin' out of his mind. So I would say that unless the model has a really great accounting for the talent level of those replacement players, and I haven't read the article, that I have it like up and I just haven't read it. It's like one of my 80 tabs. And I've only gotten halfway through the most recent episode of their podcast, which may or may not even cover this. I would say that it's maybe not quite accurate, but it's also probably smart to take the under anyway, just because I think the offense, it's going to be difficult for the offense to be as good, even though Cousins is a better quarterback than Keenum, because Keenum had an unusual year for himself as well. And so I don't know if you can replicate that passing offense even with a better quarterback, just because it was just so unlikely what happened.
Yeah. Next question is a great one from Sean Ray, who asks, since roughing the passer is now a regular tackle, have we considered that Spielman's strategy going into the year to do nothing with the O-line was so that way our offense is based around penalty yardage?
Yeah, that also means your $84 million quarterback has to get beat up in order for you to advance the ball, right?
Well, you want to get a Super Bowl, you got to break a few eggs. Like,
yeah, it's like a Jedi ninja move that didn't think 2 steps ahead. I'm like, wait, hold on.
this is going to work out so crap, there goes his ACLs.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's probably not it, but it probably...
It makes about as much sense as anything at this point.
Yeah, right. They asked me about this on NPR. They were like, hey, what do you think about the penalties? And I was like, honestly, I kind of don't care about the tackling penalty. That stuff's just going to get resolved. Like, they already went down week 3. They had a meeting about it. And in the preseason, they're just going to call a lot of it and then review it and then call it better during the regular season. That's fine. But they reviewed Antoine Williams' sack and then decided after review to fine him. Yeah, man, screw you guys.
Yeah.
Like, the disdain was dripping off. It's an NPR sin, right? Where I allowed emotion to get into the radio.
Yeah, it's kind of you have to imagine yourself on the set of the Sweaty Balls conversation from SNL. Like, you just have to fully engulf yourself in that.
Yeah. I hate it. I hate the roughing the pass. And they called it again last week. I forget who it was on. But they called it again. It was a sack. He's not a defensive player. He has the ball.
If he has the ball, it shouldn't be a penalty. No. One would think.
And I think on the last podcast, I was like, that's just a mistake. They'll take it back. I mean, they reviewed in New York during the regular season. They didn't during the preseason. And he had the ball. I'm sure it was they either said the penalty wrong and it was supposed to be unnecessary roughness, or no, it's roughing the passer on sacks.
It feels like the old lady in that commercial is like, that's not how any of this works.
Yeah, I would be swearing so much right now if I didn't want iTunes to maintain the clean podcast rating, which is very, by the way.
Underrated importance there. Observed Idiocy says, when will Andy Carlson's brother Daniel stop missing field goals?
Well, in our scenario of grabbing the Norwegian Raven Viking, which, by the way, very appropriate because of Odin's Raven.
Mm-hmm.
Never.
It really is the most Viking thing to happen this year.
Right.
So Moving on.
That's insane. Like, your kicker missed too many kicks, so we grabbed a Viking from the Ravens.
We just wanted to double down on the Viking situation. That's all.
I mean, I predict he'll make all his kicks the next game. Like, that's not even that bold to predict. It just feels bold because it's the Vikings. But he'll make all his kicks the next game. I predict he'll be 90+% on extra points and 80+% on field goals. Let's say 83-ish. Just see how close I can. Those are my predictions. Write them down, James.
We have predictions going on. All right.
Remember like a couple of seasons ago when we started doing bold predictions every podcast and then we stopped keeping track of them?
Yeah, well, it was because those were such irrational, exuberant predictions. Fun. They were great, yeah. We might have to bring that back for the week one podcast. Delta BC Dad asks, is this just PTSD talking, or am I crazy to think that we're going 8-8 this year with our O-line and tougher schedule? It could be both.
I mean, I'm going to answer yes, it's the PTSD talking. So Nick Olson wrote a piece. I think it's over at Vikings Territory. I'll link it. I haven't read it yet, but he tweeted a bunch about his thoughts anyway. So I feel like I have an understanding of what he's trying to get across. Plus, he tweeted a summary of the article. So basically, I've read it. Please don't do that with my articles. Please read all of them. I'll link it in the show notes. About why he doesn't think the offensive line is going to be a problem, and I think he's probably making good points based off of the conversations that I've seen him have with other people before he wrote that article. And the points generally are, hey, actually, the offensive line didn't allow a ton of pressure. They're 12th best, not even 12th worst, 12th best in pressures allowed per snap or something along those lines. At least the starters, maybe. Riley Reef looked really good in the last game. And the reason that they've got bad PFF grades or whatever is because of run blocking, and running doesn't matter. So who cares? And also guards don't matter. Tackles matter. And the tackle situation is probably fine. Maybe he's projecting Brown and Neal starts and looks good. Who knows? Pat Elflein's going to come back week 3. Great. Mike Remmers is already back. Great. The bad stuff we saw from the right guard position from whoever is the worst of the two guards doesn't matter. Mike Remmers is back. Cool. So the offensive line is better than you think. And I've been saying that the offensive line is better than it seems during training camp when they played 4 backups and Riley Reef. That's fine. They'll be better, but I'm still worried. I don't think it'll hold up. I think that here's the thing. I remember, maybe this is not very smart. I'm crafting a cautionary tale from an anecdote, and I remember it because I was right, and I maybe don't remember stuff I was wrong on because that's what humans do. But
specifically
all of those,
you,
specifically me. All those caveats aside, maybe I'm not remembering the times where this didn't happen, or I was the opposite of right, instead of neither. But I remember when TJ Clemmings was playing the Pittsburgh Steelers in the preseason, and he did not allow, I think, a pressure, or he didn't allow very many pressures. And after the game, I wrote in a piece, I was like, hey, I think TJ Clemmings kind of sucked. This is worrisome. And people were like, well, how? He didn't allow pressure. And I was like, well, take a look at how he didn't allow pressure. And he was playing against Bud Dupree. And Dupree was rocketing past him. And then he just wouldn't do anything with it because he's Bud Dupree. He's stiff as a board. He can't turn a corner to save his life. But against edge rushers that can turn the edge, in the name, it would be a huge problem because he was lunging, he was reaching, his footwork was out of place, his weight, he was bending at the waist instead of at the knees, and he was panicking, but it didn't matter because Bud Dupree kind of sucks, or at least did then. And he probably still sucks, kind of. And I wrote it's not that the number of pressures matters; it's how he played. How his technique mattered because it predicted better than the number of pressures. And while I haven't done as clear a technical breakdown of Rashad Hill or Brian O'Neill or Riley Reef or any of the interior offensive linemen yet, I'm writing that piece right now, I I would say that the amount of pressure that they've given up is maybe not actually a great indication of the amount of pressure they'll give up during the season. I am definitely worried. Isadora has improved his technique, but it's still not very good. Tom Compton, I think, is a bit of a disaster. I think his PFF numbers are fine, which that's another reason to think about that. But yeah, I'm more worried than Nicholas is, but I don't think it'll lead to an 8-8 season. I think the Vikings will still have a winning record despite this kind of disaster at O-line.
Yeah, we'll see. Kyle Slaby asks, what is your most regrettable restaurant-centric decision? Like dishes not ordered or most disappointing meal, something like that.
Oh, man, I wish I had seen this question so I could think about it because there's like a lot of potential answers.
I used to go to Subway fairly often.
Oh, well, there's your answer.
And, well, yeah, but you can occasionally get a good you can occasionally get a halfway decent sandwich at Subway. But I would... this particular time I went to Subway and I ordered a meatball sub, and it was the time of the night when when they weren't just going to change them out. And clearly the meatballs have been in there too long.
Jesus.
So you take a bite of it and like, oh God, what the hell just happened? Like every bit of this sandwich tastes like just the worst moment of your life. I was like, that happens. That happened far too often for a little while there. I was like, oh, okay, well, I just know that after 10 o'clock, I can't order a sub at this particular Subway because they are terrible.
Yeah, I've made regrettable food decisions that are very memorable. I don't know if that qualifies restaurant decisions or just kind of how this is framed. But I mean, like gas station food, right? I'm like, I know this is not a good idea.
Oh, yeah.
And then like 45 minutes later, I was like, yeah, I was right. Wow. Like, as I'm in the bathroom.
I forget if it was on Reddit or Twitter that somebody had said something along the lines of, it doesn't matter how old you are, when you're getting snacks at a gas station, you still feel like an 8-year-old. Like, right, I'm going to get this, right? And I'm going to get this, and I'm going to get this. And, I probably don't need this gigantic, Pringles thing, but I'm not going to eat all the Pringles, am I? No.
Right.
You find yourself
gas station egg salad sandwiches. Don't do that.
No, or you find yourself at the Clearwater station on 94, and you just buy everything.
Right.
Like they have a bakery there. This is amazing. Oh, and you guys have sandwiches and soup, and you can make it back to your. It feels like the Walmart situation where you go in for like a pack of batteries, and you come out with like a TV and like 3 Xbox games and like a whole like thing of groceries. Like, oh no. Oh, this went horribly wrong.
I saw a YouTube video of someone who was like, "Hey, I found like steak at the dollar store," and I was like, "Okay, I have to watch this." And so all the steaks were $1, and true. They got New York strip, I guess, and it was shaved super thin, right? So they got 3 of them. So I got $3 worth of dollar store steak, and one of them looked like a steak had just been cut really thin. Great. The other 2 looked like brown as hell and awful and brown and awful. And, most of the time it's just oxidized, but like it looked awful. He puts all 3 on an actual grill, which I thought was another bad decision because like you end up leaving, it's such a thin steak, you end up leaving half of it on the grill. Yeah. I guess in hindsight, that's actually a good decision, right? Because then you don't have to eat half of it. But he ends up eating it, right? And like so he eats some. It's very tough because it's super thin, and he wanted a good sear. And I don't think his grill was hot enough. Another reason not to put it on a grill, because he wanted it to, have like not charred bits, but like caramelized bits. But as soon as you caramelize it, it's like cooked through. So he eats the one that was like red and looked like a shaved off steak. And he gives his wife, he wasn't even thinking about it. And he gives his wife one of the 2 super brown, disgusting ones. And she's like, this smells bad. And I was like, oh, well, throw it away. And then she like eats it. I'm like, oh,
well,
no.
That's a good way to get irreconcilable differences.
Yeah, right. They didn't show her throwing up, but I imagine it happened. So I can't think of any decision I've made in a restaurant that's as regrettable as that.
Regrettable as random YouTube guy getting dollar steaks. I've actually, the girlfriend is fond of picking up things for the kids when she goes, like, if just like dollar store, like, oh, all the kids are going out, the kids are going on a trip for school. Let's just buy a bunch of like gigantic stuff here. It'll be $1. It'll save some money. Like, okay, great. And I've actually seen the dollar steak thing in the back, and there is nothing on this planet other than like saving the life of my son that would make me want to have one of those. Like,
right. Well, I mean, okay, so you don't have a ton of money. You want to have steak. You can only spend $1. You're at the dollar store. You see a steak. I get it.
You spent, at this point, he spent $3 to get $1 of steak. Really 50 cents of a steak, but
Yeah, right.
But you spend $3 to get $1 out of that. That's a decent ratio, I suppose. But
he wasn't even like careful about which ones he should. Like, if you're gonna do that, like, see if you can't. But if you have to, get the one that looks like a steak, man.
Go to the butcher and try to like trade a song for a steak.
Right.
That only works in Austin, by the way.
I don't want to like clown on people for being in like a tough situation and just wanting a little bit of relief and having a steak, but like get the one that looks like a steak.
Yeah. If you're gonna go the dollar, if you're gonna do the dollar steak, do some research first. Do some real legwork before you decide what you're going to put down your gullet.
Yeah, watch the YouTube video. Come on.
And don't give the worst one to your wife.
Yeah, that was... yeah, he didn't even do it on purpose. But like, wow, buddy.
Yeah.
That's rough.
From Don from Ohio, who asks, Arif is given the Infinity Gauntlet and he only has 2 choices with it. He can snap his fingers and the Vikings lose half of their team, or he snaps his fingers and makes Eric Thompson, Ted, Andy Carlson, and Luke Spinman disappear. Which route do you choose? And everyone knows you're behind the snap.
Okay, well, obviously the bloggers. Like, that's... I'm sorry, guys, but like, it's 4 of you and like 45 of them.
Yeah.
This is just a numbers game. No tough feelings, everybody but Andy.
The machine had to die. That's all.
The machine had to die.
That's all you. That's the only takeaway from this.
And then added benefit. It's probably better for my job. I mean, I'm probably losing my job either way because I just committed murder. But in a world where I somehow keep a job, I feel like it's more likely in a situation where I kill 4 people instead of 45 people. And also those people aren't playing for the Vikings. So
it would be difficult for you to be like brought back to camp the next year, I feel.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's no explain. Like, if you're like, dude, you killed my best friend, why are you here? I can't just be like, well, I was forced into it. I had to kill one of the... Like, that guy's not going to be like, oh, yeah, that's reasonable. No one's going to be like, oh, you were forced into killing him.
You killed my daddy. Oh, crap. Sorry.
I mean, it was a numbers game. I mean... If it was your daddy or Eric, should I have killed Eric? Yes! That's what the kid's going to say.
It turns into the situation from Kill Bill 1 where, if you're still sore about this when you get older, you can find me.
Right, yeah, right.
Oh, jeez. So the Fantasy Football League for Norse Code has been split into 2, and we have 2 separate leagues. Arif is in both of them, despite what Don from Ohio was saying earlier today, which I have no idea what that was.
Yeah, I only received 1 invite because I only needed to receive 1. You just renewed the other. So, yeah, it was totally fine.
You were fine. But Don wanted to remind everyone that I went 0-16 last year. So... as a result, he has asked the following. We need to lay out some odds for James's chance in fantasy football this year. Number of wins, over-under of 3.
Well, James, it's your team. Are you taking the over or the under?
You know what's stupid is that because of the recent additions to, I say additions, but like the recent back-end stuff that Yahoo did for fantasy football, they now list your career record through all of your leagues.
Oh, no.
And I've had several through Yahoo for nearly a dozen years now. And you know what it lists not a dozen, like it's got to be at least like 8. But you know what it lists my record as overall?
What?
I am the Jeff Fisher of fantasy football
wow.
league. Apparently, I am 117 and 117.
That's incredible.
That is almost impossible to do.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And it is all a result of going 0 and 16 last year.
I mean, congrats, dude.
Yeah, that's I strive to be the Jeff Fisher of anything, really. I'm the one who should have the Infinity Gauntlet.
Right, yeah.
I wouldn't even blink at that.
Well, I guess I have to take the over, right? Your career record is 500.
Yeah.
Precise.
I think that it has to be at that point. First win before week 4. He's doing 15-1 odds. Jesus.
Wow. 15-1. I'll take it.
Yeah, I'm taking.
You're probably playing someone like Kyle. You'll be fine.
Yeah, first win versus Don from Ohio.
Oh,
25 million to 1. Dude. And of course, first win versus him due to the negative 25 extra point rule. Yeah, that has to happen. Like I need to. Yeah,
your first win coming because of the extra point rule. That would be phenomenal.
Especially against him would be just the perfect moment. Seeing as how I lost twice to him in the regular season as a result of the extra point rule. So
yeah,
I feel like I'm due on some of this.
By the way, reminder, you are required to roster a kicker.
Yeah, in the Norse Code Fantasy League, you are 100% required to have a kicker playing that week. Otherwise, you give up. You forfeit that particular week.
Yeah, we had one situation where somebody forgot to play a kicker, but they had already lost that game anyway, so we didn't do anything about it.
Yeah, it didn't matter, but the rule is important. This isn't Nam. There are rules, and our rules state you must play a kicker. You cannot just have this, you can't just have this live grenade sitting on the bench. You have to have it in play. So that is, that's going to be it for this week's episode. Arif, let's plug something.
Yeah, theathletic.com/Minnesota. The promotion is over, so you have to pay the full subscription price. But it seems like they offer promotions like all the time, so like wait a week, I guess. Or if you're a student, I think you can get a promotion as well at like any time. So go to The Athletic, subscribe to The Athletic. My most recent articles are, again, position previews. So I've got a piece up on the linebackers. I've got a piece up on the tight ends. I've got a piece up on, all the defensive positions. So like the defensive backs, I think, is the most recent one. And I'm just kind of checking through the offense. I wrote the tight ends, writing the offensive line right now. Head over there. There's some other stuff I'm going to link to the show notes, the 1500 ESPN article, that Nicholas Olson article at Vikings Territory, etc.
Yeah, go ahead and check that out. And again, if you are interested in getting some of the swag that we grabbed from the London game, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and go ahead and donate $1 or more per month, and that will put you into the drawing for that. And I'll give that till the start of the regular season to be sending that out. So if you guys go in and donate the money there, you will be receiving a little bit of swag from us. So that's kind of cool. Otherwise, you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode and donate that way. So that is going to be it for us. For Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And as Mike Zimmer says, remember to tweet that. And we will see you next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.